Hello, welcome to the first episode of the Star Wars Mark of Balance podcast. My name is Mark, and I am super excited to finally get started with this. I've always wanted to be a Star Wars content creator in some capacity. Being a fan has been good my whole life, but kind of elevating past that level to something more than a fan is definitely always been a dream of mine. And to be honest, I don't know, I didn't really think I could ever do it. But this whole quarantine, terrible situation we're all in has kind of given me time to rethink that and kind of say, I can do this. And what kind of Star Wars fan would I be if I didn't take a page out of the playbook of the movies? I mean, there's clear instructions. Do or do not, there is no try. And to be honest, I never really understood that statement until I got a little older. When you try things, you're kind of expecting to fail, or there's a little bit of apprehension when you try a thing instead of saying, no, I'm going to do this. So in this case, I'm going to do it. I'm not going to try. I'm going to do this podcast, and I'm super excited for it. Now, what kind of Star Wars fan am I? I could do a bunch of different stories of all the Star Wars celebrations I've been to, all the Star Wars weekends down in Disney I've been to, or the awkward eye contact I've made with Ashley Eckstein, voice actress of Ahsoka Tano, the now goddess-level character in Star Wars, and my huge collection of Legos that just keeps getting bigger year by year, and I'm really looking for serious inquiries for places I can put them because I am actually running out of space. But I think the best thing that'll describe my love and passion for Star Wars is the Star Wars generation I believe I belong to. Most people split up the generations based on the movies, the original trilogy generation, the prequels generation, and now the sequel generation. But I would consider myself being a part of the Clone Wars generation, which I think is a generation that isn't talked about a lot, or at least hasn't been referenced a lot in the Star Wars fandom itself. If we were going off movies, yeah, I would say I'm a prequel generation Star Wars fan, but to be honest, the only movie I remember actually seeing in the movie theaters was Revenge of the Sith. I remember showing up, crying a little, and bringing a lightsaber and turning it on in the movie theater. Probably wouldn't be allowed nowadays, but I remember that much. Other than that, I can't remember seeing Attack of the Clones in the movie theater, to be honest. I probably did, but I don't remember it. So while I did grow up on those movies, my fondest memories of Star Wars as a kid was the Clone Wars. I mean, the show came out in 2008, making me 10. The movie came out also in 2008, a day before my birthday, by the way, also ups my Star Wars cred. But I was only 10 at the time. I still remember my dad telling me that they were going to make a Star Wars Clone Wars TV series from a newspaper. That's right, he read it in a newspaper. Do you remember those? Anyway, not only was it the show that I grew up on, Star Wars-wise, but I think Clone Wars fans are super unique in Star Wars because we were such a small group. Most people that talk about seeing the Clone Wars now have only done so because of the hype around Season 7 and, Mandalorian using a lot of characters that we see directly from the Clone Wars with Bo-Katan and Ahsoka. But at the time when it came out, and before the Disney merger in 2012, Star Wars was not the cool thing to like at the time. Not at least like it is now. And let me tell you how cool I was. I'd watch it every Friday, live, at 8 o'clock at night, and then wake up the next morning on Saturday and watch the recorded version again. So, my Friday nights for like 5 years, pretty cool. The only thing we had Star Wars-wise at the time was the show and a couple video games throughout, like The Force Unleashed. But there was no certain future. So if you were watching Clone Wars week to week, you did it because you loved Star Wars and you wanted to hear more about the universe and the lore that has been established. You didn't know if there was going to be a future for Star Wars movies. You were just along for the ride. And I think that's really special because it's a different kind of commitment to Star Wars than it is for other people. The Clone Wars generation of fans witnessed Star Wars at its lowest point when the prequels weren't looked upon as good movies or good parts of the Star Wars galaxy, and there wasn't a certain future for it. And while we saw it at the lowest of lows, we've now been along the ride and seen its highs of highs. The sequel trilogy for what it is, Clone Wars Season 7, obviously Mandalorian, the huge hit it is now, 10,000 shows that were all just announced across a bunch of different eras in the Star Wars galaxy. Clone Wars fans, led by their Lord and Savior, Dave Filoni, and the maker himself, George Lucas, who had just as big a hand in creating the Clone Wars as Dave Filoni did, and Clone Wars is the last thing George Lucas touched in the Star Wars galaxy, which is kind of insane. I guess my main point is, the Clone Wars generation of fans are a patient, passionate, small and strong group of fans that appreciate the Star Wars galaxy as a whole and understand the connectiveness of it, I think more than any other piece of media coming out of the Star Wars galaxy. So with that all said, I hope my love and passion comes across during this whole podcast. and that you can get a new appreciation or a different perspective on Star Wars that you might not have thought of. Other than Star Wars, I'm just a college graduate student who's studying to save the planet. I plan to release an episode a week, starting with the Light and Dark series, as I'm calling it right now, which is basically going to go over the sequel trilogy and kind of why those movies do work in some points and why they don't work in other points, and whether they add value to the Star Wars universe as a whole. I'll also be doing reactions, whether it be new trailers or reactions of old Star Wars media like The Mandalorian Season 2, which I haven't talked about. Rankings on, either Star Wars arcs in TV shows, movies, books even. I mean, if I'm going to read a book, it's going to be a Star Wars book. And then obviously any trailers or any news stories that I hear and want to talk about with you guys. And I also really want to talk about Star Wars scores and maybe ranking them or having reactions to them, because those have gotten me through a lot of study sessions, a lot of working sessions in high school, college, and now graduate school. So I'm really passionate about Star Wars scores, and I definitely want to talk about them and definitely interact with people that share the same feelings as me, especially the deep cuts, Shout out Star Wars Rebels Season 4 score. Another important thing I want to get out of this show is for it to be interactive. Star Wars, since the Disney merger, has become very divided and sometimes even toxic. And if I could do anything to change that through interactions and discussions on whether you agree with me or disagree with me, I think that might go a long way to making the Star Wars universe a little bit more understanding. And I think that wraps up episode 1 of the Mark of Balance podcast. Thank you so much for listening. If you would please follow me on Instagram at star_wars_Mark of Balance, and on Twitter at another Star Wars thing. See, it just comes out of me. At Mark of Balance on Twitter. And I'll hopefully get a YouTube page up and running. There would just be recordings of the podcast with actual video along with the commentary. That'll also be at Star Wars Mark of Balance, if you'd like to subscribe to that early. Once again, thank you so much for listening, and I hope you enjoy the journey we take together, and I'm really, really excited to get started. So I'll talk to you next time. See you later. May the Force be with you.